Then I saw people walking towards me.
But it was like it had no face.
Skin hanging from it.
It was black.
The radiation.
The area around the eyes had swollen up. It had no nose. They had not tested it, so they made an experiment to find out by testing it on human beings.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. That was because we wished in the first attack to avoid, insofar as possible, the killing of civilians. But that attack is only a warning of things to come.
With the Nazis marching across Europe and Eastern Asia falling to the Japanese, World War II was entering full swing by 1941. The United States, however, was content to remain blissfully uninvolved, protected by its dual oceans. But the United States would soon receive a call to arms that it could not ignore. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor early on December 7, 1941.
I was listening to the radio, in my radio on top of the garage, and I heard it, and I went down and asked my dad whether he would sign papers for me to go. I was only 17 years old.
This led to the United States' declaration of war on Japan and the ensuing 2.5 years of conflict in the Pacific.
It took the declaration, it took the attack on Japan, and Hitler following up, declaring war on the United States. We declared war on December 8, 1941, on Japan alone.
Meanwhile, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had initiated a secret atomic weapons program codenamed the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Engineering District was a code name to fool German spies that might still be about. We'd actually rolled up most of their espionage apparatus early on, but you never know. And we were also concerned about the Soviets finding things out, because this was a joint American-British operation, but it was being held very close to the West. So the codename Manhattan Engineering Project, it was thought would divert whatever espionage attention there was to Manhattan, New York City. It was the codename for the development of the atomic bomb. And so we were on an emergency basis working to develop an atomic bomb so the Germans wouldn't get it first. And it was a huge scientific industrial undertaking to see if we could develop an atomic bomb. It isn't really true that Truman was just told about the Manhattan Project on April 13th and it was a total shock to him. His diaries reveal that he had some inkling that what was going on out in the West and in Tennessee had to do with some super weapon project. But he didn't know anything beyond that.
For 3 years, FDR had stood at the helm of the United States war effort, making strides on either front and protecting the United States.
And then the president dies on April 12th, and he's now president. That's how he comes. Those are the events that led to him becoming president. And he is about to, drink from the fire hose about all the things he has to learn about, including there's this thing called the Manhattan Project.
After several years of island hopping through the Pacific, the United States finally stood at the back door of Japan, Okinawa.
The final Western Pacific obstacle in America's costly march to Japan was Okinawa. A more than 50 times the size of Iwo Jima, Okinawa was the largest amphibious invasion and the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War, with over 12,000 American casualties, 30 ships were sunk, 368 damaged, and the fleet lost 763 aircraft. It was April 1 Fool's Day, April 1st, 1945, when my ship, the USS Backstrom, an attack transport carrying a crew of 400 and transporting 3,000 Marines along with equipment ready for battle into the transport area in the Bay of Okinawa. This under a head of fire from Japanese planes bent on stopping the troops from landing on the beaches. There were several hundred other transporters with the same kind of cargo, all converging on the island at the same time. The enemy planes overhead were dive bombers manned by accommodated pilots willing to give their lives to sink a ship. There's quite a story about the Battle of Okinawa, where fierce fighting took place between the U.S. and Japanese forces, which numbered over 100,000. But the battle occurred with much loss of life. Only a couple of months before the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan and the war ended. The objective of dropping the bomb was to save thousands of American lives in the next step, which was the invasion of the mainland Japan. The question is how many more lives would have been saved had the bomb been dropped a couple of months earlier before Okinawa. I'm happy that I survived that Battle of Okinawa.
The island of Okinawa, the part that was fought over was wrecked. Destroyed cities, destroyed, tens of thousands of civilians killed. And that would, leave Japan just a basket case forever.
In the wake of the devastating invasion of Okinawa, the United States was faced with a decision. Should they continue their invasion of the Japanese mainland, killing millions on either side, or resort to more immediate solutions?
No, it was not an open process. It was a fairly small group who sat on the interim committee and discussed the use of the bomb. There were lots of people who should have been involved in this discussion, who weren't involved in the discussion. First and foremost, the scientists. I mean, other than Oppenheimer, who was the scientific head of the Manhattan Project, none of the scientists were actually participating in the decision over whether to use the weapon. Some of them tried to get to the table, but they were shut it off, and they weren't heard from. And that really, I think, crippled the effectiveness of the decision-making process. The Emperor is not Adolf Hitler, and the Imperial House is this important symbol. And if the Japanese feel like the Imperial House is being put in jeopardy by unconditional surrender, that may prevent them from otherwise accepting the terms. It was the absolute terrible bloodshed of this war in the Pacific, and the way the Japanese were fighting. I mean, they wouldn't surrender. They fought to the last. And as we got closer to the home isles and started to encounter their civilian populations, the reaction of the civilians was horrifying. On Saipan, thousands of civilians leapt to their deaths from cliffs, clutching their children. There is film of this that you can see if you go type in the right references on YouTube. That was taken at the time. I mean, this is horrifying. And our casualties were going up and up and up. And okay, sure, I mean, the kill ratio was quite in our favor, but the casualties from an invasion of Japan were just horrifying. They just felt, hey, we should find out what it does. They believed we should make the statement to the world. If the war could save many American lives, fine. A demonstration was impractical.
The way it developed, actually, what started it was Japan attacking us. And we had to retaliate from Pearl Harbor. But, yeah, I agree with what we did.
Relations with the Soviet Union were already starting to get strained. It's a whole controversy about who was responsible for the Cold War. But the Cold War was already unfolding. Now, whether Truman behaved materially differently from Franklin Delano Roosevelt is a subject that divides historians to this day. I think Truman was more abrupt. Roosevelt would have been more nuanced. You know, let's give Roosevelt another year of good health. But I think Roosevelt would probably have done substantively pretty much what Truman did in responding to what was seen as aggressive Soviet action in Europe. Saving lives, ending the war. That's simple. That was his feeling at the time, and that's what he always said afterwards.
While those in favor of using the bomb presented valid arguments, their opponents debated with equal fervor.
The scientists themselves weren't sure what this would mean. They were very, very concerned that this should never be unleashed. I mean, some of them wished that we could somehow just put the Pandora back in her box and bury the knowledge. But at the very least, there was great concern about our using this as a weapon of war. And they wanted something done short of that. We're stuck in a thermonuclear armed world.
Taking both sides into account, Truman decided that his first priority must be saving the lives of American soldiers. And so, on August 6, 1945, President Truman finally decided to act. In a B-29 nicknamed the Enola Gay, Paul Warfield Tibbets Jr. flew over Hiroshima, Japan, and unleashed the full destructive power of Little Boy, the first atomic bomb to be used in warfare. Even after this display of force, the Japanese government refused to surrender, believing that no nation could possess 2 atomic bombs.
Of course, Truman would have issued an order immediately to stop the bombing if we heard, the day after Hiroshima, that the Japanese were accepting the Potsdam Declarations. But we didn't hear anything. In fact, after the Potsdam Declaration, all we heard was this one obscure word from the Japanese Prime Minister in a press conference, mokusatsu, which is an ancient Japanese court phrase meaning to ignore with contempt.
Proving them wrong, on August 9th at 11:02 a.m., Major Charles W. Sweeney released the second bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. Shortly thereafter, the Japanese agreed to an unconditional surrender.
Yet the destruction caused by the 2 atomic bombs was not so easily dismissed. Both Little Boy and Fat Man exacted a terrible toll for their power. Between the initial flash burns, shockwave, and radiation, survivors then had to face the dangers of nuclear fallout. Estimates placed the casualties for Hiroshima near 150,000 and Nagasaki near 75,000. Along with the physical casualties of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the dropping of the atomic bomb ushered in the age of a nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union.
We, by choosing that course, we did unleash an arms race. And we are living in the shadow still of thermonuclear destruction. That is a legacy of the atomic bombings.
The decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan stands out as one of the most difficult and momentous decisions in history. Justifying his decision with saving lives and a swift end to the war, Truman ultimately unleashed a never-before-seen destructive force on the world. While this committed a great crime upon humanity and directly led to the nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, the lives that were saved as a direct result of the bombing of Hiroshima have proven invaluable, thereby justifying this most difficult of decisions.